I woke up in their guest room to the sound of a blender, loud, whirring, careless. It was 6:42 a.m., and my stitches still ached from the surgery a week ago. The pain meds made mornings foggy, but not foggy enough to miss the sound of my daughter-in-law, Megan, laughing from the kitchen, like nothing had changed. Like I wasn't lying in their house, struggling to sit up without tearing something. I reached for the walker by the bed, the one my doctor insisted I use, until my hip healed. It wobbled when I leaned on it. Probably because Josh had assembled it half asleep 2 nights before. I made my way down the hall, each step deliberate, breath shallow, toward the bathroom. It took me 7 full minutes. No one offered help. No one even noticed I was awake. This was day 8 of my recovery, and already I had memorized every creak in the hallway floor. When I came out, Josh was on his laptop at the dining table. Megan was pouring almond milk into a smoothie glass. "Morning," I said. Josh grunted something that might have been, "Hey." Megan glanced over her shoulder. "Oh, you're up." That was it. "No." "How are you feeling?" "No." "Do you need breakfast?" Not even a refill on the bottle of water I'd left empty on the nightstand. I stood there for a moment, holding the hallway wall with one hand, my other gripping the walker. "I'll just warm up some oatmeal," I said to no one in particular, and moved to the microwave. "You know where everything is," Megan replied, smiling, as if that was kindness. The spoon clattered in my trembling hand as I stirred. I'd imagined this recovery differently. I thought I'd be surrounded by family. Maybe a few days of doting fruit bowls, fluffed pillows, those small gestures that say, "We're glad you're still here." Instead, I felt like a guest overstaying her welcome. Later that morning, as I tried to fold a blanket on the couch, I overheard Megan on the phone. I wasn't eavesdropping, her voice just carried. "She's not even trying," she said. "She just sits around and expects to be waited on. We don't owe her anything. She's lucky we let her stay here at all." I froze in the hallway. "We don't owe her anything." That line burrowed into me deeper than any scalpel ever could. My son didn't say a word. He was sitting right next to her. I could hear the rhythmic click of his mouse. I didn't cry. I didn't stomp into the room and demand answers. I didn't remind them that the only reason they had this house in the first place was because I'd drained half my retirement to help with the down payment 3 years ago. I didn't mention the nights I drove 40 minutes across town to babysit their son when the nanny canceled, or the groceries I stocked in their fridge when Josh lost his job for 6 months. I went back into the guest room and closed the door quietly, sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the framed print on the wall. Some quote about family and love in cursive script, the kind they sell at discount stores. The irony made my stomach turn. I took out my pill organizer and popped a painkiller, not because the incision hurt, but because everything else did. That afternoon, Megan forgot to bring my prescription refill from the pharmacy. She smiled and said, "You know, you're still capable. They didn't operate on your brain." Josh chuckled under his breath. I used the last $2 in my purse to request a delivery online. When the pills arrived, no one offered to open the door. That evening, Josh reheated some frozen lasagna for dinner. Megan plated 2 servings and took them upstairs. I was left with a single note: "There's salad in the fridge, if you want some." The fridge was too high for me to reach the top shelf. I didn't bother. Instead, I made toast, sat at the dining table alone, chewing in silence, the television humming from the living room where they sat watching a show I once loved. The next morning, my friend Diana called to check in. I hadn't told her much, just that the surgery went okay, and I was staying with Josh and Megan while I recovered. I didn't have the strength to admit what that really meant. "How are you holding up?" she asked gently. I hesitated, glanced at the closed door, and whispered, "I think I'm a ghost in my own family." Diana paused. "You don't sound surprised." I swallowed hard. "I guess I'm not," I said, "but it still hurts." She didn't offer cliches, just silence. Then a soft, "You deserve better, you know." That night, I stared at the ceiling, tracing imaginary lines in the plaster with my eyes. "We don't owe her anything." Over and over, like a broken prayer. They were right. Maybe they didn't owe me anything, but I didn't owe them my silence anymore, or my presence, or my patience, and certainly not my dignity. When you spend your life giving, you expect that someone, anyone, might remember. Not to return the favor, not even to say thank you, just to see. But sitting in that guest room, half-healed and wholly invisible, I realized I had spent my entire adult life being useful, and the moment I wasn't, I became disposable. It started with the down payment. Josh and Megan had been turned down by the bank twice. Poor credit, not enough savings, unstable income. They came to me with wide eyes and a shaky plan. Megan even baked cookies. "We just need a boost," Josh had said, holding the paperwork. "Something to show the bank we're serious." He looked so much like his father when he said that. Hopeful, earnest, slightly terrified. I didn't hesitate. I wired $38,000 the next day. When they got the keys, Megan hugged me in the empty foyer and said, "You'll always have a home with us, Linda. Always." I clung to that sentence like scripture. It made the sacrifice feel like investment. Family, I thought, is what you build on. I didn't know then that I was building my own cage. The housewarming party came and went. I brought a new toaster and 4 potted herbs. Megan redecorated a week later and gave the plants away. The toaster was stored for emergencies. I didn't say anything. I never did. Then came the babysitting. 2, sometimes 3 nights a week. Josh and Megan had started a photography business on the side. Creative hustle, they called it. I didn't charge them a dime, not for the diapers, not for the baby food I stocked in their cabinets, not for the gas money. When their car broke down, I lent them mine for 2 weeks. When the heater gave out, I paid half the repair bill. When they got the flu, I cleaned their bathroom and scrubbed their sheets while they slept. "Mom, you're a lifesaver," Josh said. Megan would leave thank you notes, scrawled in rushed cursive, with hearts over her eyes. And then nothing. No one asks a sponge if it's tired. They just keep wiping until it breaks. I remember the shift, subtle. A sideways glance when I asked if they'd be home for dinner. Megan started calling me Linda instead of Mom. Josh stopped kissing my cheek when he came home. Affection became transaction. I still brought groceries. Still asked if they needed anything. Still offered to watch Mason when they wanted date nights. And they said things like, "You're amazing," and "We're so lucky and couldn't have done this without you," but their eyes were already somewhere else, scrolling, dreaming of versions of life that didn't include me. When I fell down the back porch stairs last winter, I didn't tell them. I bruised half my hip and walked crooked for a week. Megan said I was just slowing down. I nodded. I always nodded. Even after the surgery, when I barely made it through the front door on crutches, I said, "Thank you for letting me recover here." Letting me, as if I hadn't built their safety net with my bare hands. The days bled together. Oatmeal, silence, medicine, more silence. The television echoed through the house, but no one asked if I wanted to join. Megan planned a weekend wine tour with friends and forgot I'd need help getting to the pharmacy. Josh worked late, but never said what for. I started writing things down, not in a bitter way, just facts. The days I made dinner, and no one ate. The dates Megan said, "We're tight this month," after I offered to cover a vet bill. The nights they locked the thermostat controls so I couldn't raise the heat past 67. Then the comment, "We don't owe her anything." I kept hearing it, even in my sleep. The thing is, they weren't wrong. No one owes anyone anything. Not by law, not even blood. Love is optional. Respect, voluntary. But I'd given them everything I had, assuming they'd choose to remember. They didn't. That morning, I went outside for the first time in 4 days. My bones ached, but the sun hit my face. And for a moment, I remembered who I used to be. Before I was too much, before I was in the way. I used to be someone who danced barefoot in the kitchen, who made blackberry jam in bulk, and labeled each jar with stickers that said "Love Mom," who held her dying husband's hand and whispered that she'd keep the family whole. God, how naive. I sat on their porch, wrapped in a throw blanket, and stared at the azalea bush that I had planted myself. It was dying, overwatered, probably, or ignored. Just like me. The wind picked up and a piece of loose mail flew off the bench. I caught it before it hit the ground, an unopened envelope addressed to Megan, from a local contractor. The name rang a bell. I'd seen it once on a quote for a basement remodel. I flipped the envelope over. Unsealed. Inside, a mock-up. Designs. The basement, my guest room, was going to become a home office with custom cabinets, demolition starting in 4 weeks. I wasn't just temporary. I was transitional. The decision had already been made. That night, I didn't sleep. I watched the ceiling spin and thought about all the ways I had tried to earn a permanent seat in my own family, all the small humiliations I tolerated to keep the peace, the half-swallowed feelings, the polite nods, the self-erasure. I wasn't angry. I was done. By sunrise, I had a list. Not of grievances, of First, check my savings. Second, call Diana. Third, find a realtor. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but I knew what I wouldn't do. I wouldn't beg to stay. The next morning, Megan knocked on the guest room door once. No pause, no can I come in. Just a perfunctory tap before she pushed it open. I scheduled the contractor, she said, holding a mug in both hands. They'll need to do measurements this weekend. Shouldn't be too disruptive, but you might want to clear out some of your things. I was still in bed, back propped up by a stack of pillows. I hadn't even put on my slippers yet. She didn't seem to notice. I blinked. Clear out? She sipped her coffee, ignoring my confusion. Just your personal stuff. They'll be measuring for built-ins. I watched her walk out, like it was the most normal thing in the world to talk about demolishing the room someone was healing in, as if it were already vacant, as if I were already gone. That day I made it a point to stay quiet, to observe. I wanted to see just how invisible I had become. They had stopped offering meals days ago. Megan said it was easier if we each just took care of ourselves. I'd noticed her labeling containers in the fridge with permanent marker. J. M. Mason. Nothing with L. I kept my items in a tote bag by the microwave. The thermostat was still locked. The door to the backyard was now always deadbolted. They said it was for Mason's safety, but it felt like being closed in. That night, I couldn't sleep. My hip was acting up again, a low throbbing pulse that wouldn't quit. I shuffled out of bed around midnight, trying to get some circulation going, and hobbled to the kitchen for a glass of water. That's when I heard them. Their voices were muffled behind the closed bedroom door, but I heard enough. I don't think she's going anywhere anytime soon, Megan whispered. Josh's voice followed. Tired. We just need to be patient. She'll get the hint. We could always suggest a senior community, Megan offered. She's still mobile. She'd qualify. Josh said nothing. Megan added, You said she had some land in Auburn, right? Maybe she could sell that and use it to move. I walked back to the guest room in silence. Not crying, not panicked, just done. So, I made a plan. I wasn't going to get the hint. I was going to leave before they had a chance to pretend it was their idea. The next day, I called Diana during Megan's grocery run. I kept my voice low. Do you still know that realtor you used when you moved to Tall Pines? I asked. Diana didn't hesitate. I'll text you his number. Are you okay? I'm getting there, I replied. But I need out. By Friday, I had a call scheduled with a man named Peter Crane. Kind voice, fast talker, very direct. You said the land is in Auburn, he asked. That area's picking up. You could sell, but if it's zoned residential and you've got the title clear, you might want to build instead. Something small, efficient. The permits take time, but I know a guy. I don't want to live in a shoebox, I said, but I don't need much. He chuckled. That makes two of us. I smiled for the first time in days. After the call, I pulled the title deed from my folder and stared at it for a long time. It was left to me by my sister, years ago, 10 acres, mostly flat, one tree line at the edge. I'd always thought I'd leave it to Josh one day. Let him build his dream house. Let him start a new chapter. But now I saw it differently. That land wasn't a hand-me-down. It was my exit. Later that afternoon, Megan slipped a pamphlet under my door. It had flowers on the cover and a smiling elderly couple walking arm in arm. Your new chapter, independent living with dignity. No note, no signature, just the pamphlet. The message was clear. That night I didn't eat dinner. I wasn't hungry. Instead, I started making a list of every document I'd need. I called my bank and inquired about transferring accounts. I looked up local moving companies that accepted online scheduling. I was preparing for a funeral, not mine, theirs. The funeral of the version of me that stayed quiet, that hoped for change, that waited for decency. That woman was gone. By Sunday, I'd boxed up most of my things, only what I owned, only what I needed. Megan didn't notice, Josh barely made eye contact. That night, Mason came to the doorway of my room, holding a toy truck. He's 4, too young to understand cruelty, too young to know how his parents talked about me when the doors were closed. "Grandma, are you leaving?" he asked. I knelt slowly to his level, pain flashing through my side as I did. "I think it's time," I said. He nodded once, then handed me the truck. "For you," he whispered. I blinked away the sting in my eyes. "You keep it, sweetheart." He leaned forward and kissed my cheek, the first real touch I'd had in weeks. I tucked that moment into my heart like a folded note, something to carry with me, something unspoiled. When he padded back to his room, I stood slowly and turned off the light. Tomorrow, I'd call the contractor myself, but tonight, I would sleep on my own terms. Monday morning began with another locked cabinet. I opened the hall closet to grab a fresh towel and found a padlock on the plastic bin where I'd been keeping my personal care items, extra toothpaste, a bottle of hand lotion, a spare heating pad. There was no note, no warning, just the shiny new lock and a tight coil of disbelief in my chest. I didn't ask. Asking would only give them the satisfaction of telling me they forgot. Or worse, watching Megan do that thing where she tilted her head and said, "You should really let us manage the essentials now. It's just easier that way." Instead, I sat on the edge of the guest bed and stared at the carpet, a cheap, beige loop pile, the kind that never quite comes clean, no matter how much you vacuum. I needed my pills. That was non-negotiable. My blood pressure medication was due that morning, and I hadn't had a full dose in 3 days. I was stretching what I had left, cutting them in halves, then quarters, like crumbs on a plate. I called the pharmacy first. "Yes, we have your refill," the tech said. "It was picked up yesterday afternoon." My heart slowed. "Picked up? By who?" "Your daughter, I believe." "Megan?" "Yes, that's the name." I thanked her and hung up without another word. That meant the meds were in the house. Somewhere, possibly behind another lock, or hidden in some drawer I no longer had permission to access. By noon, I still hadn't eaten. I didn't trust the kitchen. Megan had started labeling even the salt containers. There was a post-it on the milk, "For Mason only." It didn't feel like a house anymore. It felt like a prison dressed in matching towels. I made myself a mug of weak tea and tried to ignore the pounding in my ears. When Josh came home that evening, I asked him plainly, calmly, "Did Megan pick up my medication?" He didn't look up from his phone. "Yeah, she mentioned it." "Where is it?" "I think she has it in the bathroom drawer." I paused. "The locked one." He shrugged. "Josh," I said, trying to steady my voice, "I need those pills. I've been rationing." "Mom, we're just trying to keep things organized," he replied. "You've been a little forgetful lately." That word, forgetful. The implication burned. "I'm not losing my mind," I said. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." He sighed like I was making a scene, like I was the one out of line for needing access to my own health. "I'll ask Megan to give them to you," he muttered, walking away. But he didn't. That night, I searched the guest room, looking for the backup blister pack I sometimes kept in my travel kit. I found it at the bottom of my suitcase, 4 pills left. 4. My hands shook as I took one with a sip of lukewarm water. I stared at the ceiling until sunrise. I could have called Diana, could have driven to the pharmacy and requested an emergency dose, but that would mean explaining, admitting, and I wasn't ready to give them that story yet. Tuesday morning, Megan left early. I saw her pull out of the driveway in yoga pants and a headband, iced coffee in hand. Josh was still upstairs, taking calls. I waited 15 minutes, then walked into their bedroom. I wasn't snooping. I was surviving. The drawer was unlocked. Inside was a small zippered pouch, labeled meds. Mine and Mason's mixed together. My prescription bottle was there, half full, untouched since pickup. I took it without guilt. Back in the guest room, I lined up the pills like soldiers and whispered to myself, "You're not crazy, you're not weak, and you are not theirs to manage." That afternoon, I made a doctor's appointment. Not for anything urgent, just a check-in, but it was a way to get out of the house without questions. "A reason to move?" the receptionist asked. "Are you still living at the same address?" I hesitated, then said, "Temporarily." Later, while Megan was gone, I opened my laptop and started researching private mailboxes. The kind that didn't belong to a house, that wouldn't show up in online searches. I made a list of 3 locations nearby. The weight in my chest lightened just a little. That evening, Josh asked if I wanted to join them for dinner. "We're making tacos," he said, as if it erased the week that came before. I smiled. "No thanks. I already ate." Megan looked surprised. "I thought you didn't go out today." "I had leftovers." Her lips tightened. She hated not knowing. Hated when her little ecosystem shifted without her permission. After they went to bed, I started clearing out the bottom drawer of the dresser. I folded my nightgowns, my socks, my small collection of scarves. Each piece felt like a breadcrumb on the trail back to myself. I found the card Mason had made for me the day after my surgery. It was scribbled in blue marker and said, "Grandma, get well soon." There was a smiling stick figure holding a heart. I tucked it into my wallet. Because that's what you do when there's only one person in the house who remembers you're still alive. At 2 a.m., I woke to a faint buzzing. My phone lit up with a message from Diana. "Still good for Friday? I'll bring the car." I stared at it, blinking. I hadn't even asked her yet. She just knew. It happened on a Wednesday. Mason had a low-grade fever. Nothing serious, just enough to keep him home from preschool. Megan was already annoyed by 9 a.m., stomping around the kitchen because Josh had left for work early and the sitter had canceled. I offered to help, said I'd watch him. No problem. He was curled up with a tablet and some crackers, quiet as a lamb. "I've got it," Megan snapped, waving me off like I was a gnat. "You should just rest or something." Rest, as if I had been doing anything else for the past 2 weeks besides trying not to vanish completely. I sat in the corner of the living room, knitting a scarf I'd started the day before my surgery. The yarn was a soft lavender, a leftover skein from a Christmas project 2 years ago. I had no one to give it to. I just needed something for my hands. Around noon, Josh came home for lunch. Mason ran to him, immediately, clinging to his legs. Megan launched into a breathless rundown of her awful day, dramatic sighs included. Josh kissed her on the cheek and asked what was for lunch. "There's soup," she said, then glanced at me. "If there's any left." Josh smiled and headed to the kitchen. They talked low for a bit, probably thinking I couldn't hear them, but I did. I always did. "She's still here?" Josh asked. Megan sighed audibly. "Yes, obviously. I thought the contractor was coming this week." "He is. Friday. We'll figure it out." Then came the sentence. The one that split my world into a before and an after. Megan said, "We don't owe her anything, Josh." Just like that. Like she was talking about some bill she didn't want to pay. Josh didn't reply. Not right away. I waited for him to object, to defend me, to say, "Come on. That's my mother." But all I heard was the sound of a drawer opening and a spoon clinking against a bowl. That silence was worse than agreement. It was complicity. I placed the scarf down on my lap and stared straight ahead. Not at them, not at the kitchen, just at the far corner of the wall, where the paint was chipping from a leaky windowsill no one had ever bothered to fix. I waited. Maybe they'd realize I'd heard. Maybe they'd soft. They didn't. When Mason came back into the room, he sat next to me and laid his head on my arm. "You're warm," he said. I kissed the top of his head. "So are you, baby." After lunch, I went back to the guest room and closed the door, locked it. Not because I feared them, but because I needed to sit with what I'd just heard without interruption. "We don't owe her anything." The words bounced off the walls of my chest, echoing louder each time. Not shouted, not screamed, just stated, as if it were a fact. I took out a notepad from the drawer, the kind I used to keep grocery lists on, and drew a line down the center. On the left I wrote, co-signed, their mortgage, paid for 3 years of daycare, covered car repairs, bought their washer, dryer, filled their fridge when Mason was born, covered urgent vet bills, gave up weekends for babysitting. On the right, I left it blank. It wasn't revenge I was feeling. It was grief, the kind that comes when someone dies but keeps walking around, smiling in photographs and kissing their spouse. They weren't my family anymore. At least, not the kind that saw me as human. I took a walk that afternoon, short, cautious steps along the sidewalk outside. The October wind had picked up, blowing dry leaves around the front yard. Megan had removed the welcome mat and replaced it with one that said, "No shoes, no worries." I stepped off the porch, in my flats, and shuffled down the block, toward the mailbox cluster. A few houses had pumpkins out. One had Halloween decorations strung across a bush like orange spiderwebs. Normal life. For normal people. I pulled out the mail. Nothing for me, of course. Just a stack of ads and a bill addressed to Joshua Carter. I held the stack loosely in one hand, letting the breeze ruffle the edges, and thought about my sister's land again. 10 acres. Remote. Yes, but peaceful. No one breathing down my neck about thermostats. No one locking away my toothpaste. That night, I started researching modular homes. I found one. Small, but charming, white exterior, wide porch, lots of natural light, fully customizable, and move-in ready in 8 weeks. I saved the link and named the folder on my desktop Plan B. It felt more like Plan A. The next morning, I woke before anyone else. The house was quiet. I made tea with water from the bathroom sink and used a paper towel for a napkin. The kettle in the kitchen had become off-limits without asking. At 7:45 a.m., Megan knocked on my door. "We're having a contractor come by later, so if you could make yourself scarce for an hour, that'd be great." I looked at her, long and slow. "Do you want me out of the house?" I asked. She blinked. "What?" "No. It's easier, if there aren't too many people underfoot." I nodded. Then I said, "You don't owe me anything." "I understand." The color drained from her face. I didn't mean. I closed the door before she could finish. She didn't knock again. I waited until they left. Josh had taken Mason to a soccer class, and Megan, I assumed, had gone to the salon. She left in leggings and boots, talking loudly into her phone about toner and a stylist who always ran late. Once their cars disappeared down the street, I moved. Not frantically. Not sneaky. Deliberately. I opened the guest room closet, pulled down the canvas bin labeled winter sheets, and reached into the back corner where I had stashed the manila folder the day I moved in. It was still there. Untouched. Inside were a few key things: the original deed to my sister's land in Auburn, a printout of a modular home floor plan, and a sticky note with the name Peter Crane, Realtor, in my cursive handwriting. Slightly shaky from the medication, I sat down on the edge of the bed and spread everything out in front of me like puzzle pieces. The land had sat empty for nearly 2 decades, overgrown, but flat. It had been willed to me after my sister passed in 2007. I hadn't done anything with it, because at the time, I was still working full-time and helping raise Josh. I'd imagined we'd build something together one day, a second family home. A getaway. A future. But he never showed interest, just kept saying, "We'll figure it out later." Later. Never came. I unfolded the floor plan. 1 bedroom, a full kitchen, laundry nook, small porch, lots of windows, sunlight in every room, clean lines. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. Or it would be. Peter had told me the zoning was still good, that septic and utilities could be arranged within the year, that if I wanted to go faster, I could start with a prefab unit, something movable and self-contained. It wasn't ideal, but it would give me freedom, breathing space, home. I stared at the layout for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and dialed. Peter answered on the 3rd ring. "Evelyn, good to hear from you. Ready to talk serious?" "I'm ready to visit the land," I said. "Can we meet tomorrow morning?" "Absolutely," he said. "I'll bring a site map and a contractor friend. He's no pressure, just good eyes." Okay. We settled on 10 a.m. After I hung up, I sat perfectly still for nearly 20 minutes. My hands had stopped shaking. My thoughts weren't racing. For the first time since the surgery, I felt like I was standing on my own legs, even if I was still sitting down. Later that afternoon, I printed copies of all the documents and placed them into a new folder, not the old one, that had too much memory, too much dust. This one was bright red. Bought it last week at the drugstore when I was supposed to be picking up vitamins. It made me feel like I was starting something fresh. That night, Megan brought home takeout and didn't offer me any. I didn't ask. I made oatmeal in the microwave and ate it while they watched a reality show in the other room. Josh asked how I was feeling. I said fine. He didn't look up. Before bed, I tucked the red folder into my tote bag, along with a notebook, a bottle of water, and a pack of tissues. Not because I expected to cry, but because I'd rather be prepared. I laid out clothes for the next morning: soft black pants, my navy blouse with the little white flowers, and a long gray cardigan. Comfortable, neat, respectable, dignified. At 2 a.m., I woke from a dream I couldn't remember but felt heavy in my chest. I got up, made tea in the bathroom sink again, and sat at the tiny desk by the window. I opened my notebook and began to write. Not a journal entry, not a letter, just a list. Things I will no longer apologize for: needing rest, wanting warmth, asking questions, existing. I stared at the words for a long time. Then I turned the page and wrote the address of the Auburn land at the top, underlined twice. Tomorrow, I would see it again for the first time in 14 years, not as a hand-me-down, but as a beginning. Peter Crane had the kind of handshake that didn't overstay its welcome: firm, dry, respectful. He met me outside the old wooden gate that marked the edge of my sister's land, wearing pressed jeans, hiking boots, and a jacket with his name stitched in cursive on the breast. "Glad you made it," he said, nodding toward the open gravel patch where I'd parked. I wasn't sure I'd recognize it, I admitted. The land looked different, wilder. The tree line was thicker, taller, like it had been hiding a secret all these years. Grass had taken over the old clearing, but the bones of the property were still there, solid ground, high enough to avoid flooding, facing east for morning light. Peter led me through the brush, pointing things out as we walked. Septic's still viable. Electrical poles are nearby. If we go prefab or modular, we can have something move-in ready by December, weather permitting. He stopped near an old fence post and smiled. "You're not the only one looking to live quiet these days." We stood together, shoulder to shoulder, in silence for a moment. Wind rustled the leaves. A bird called once, then again. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked gently. "I'm not sure about anything," I replied, "except that I can't stay where I am." He nodded. That was enough. He introduced me to Clint, a quiet man in cargo pants and a beard who circled the site and scribbled notes on a clipboard. "We'll mark out the footprint this week," he said. "Simple slab, good drainage, porch optional, but doable. You want privacy or open yard?" "Privacy," I said immediately. He smiled. "That's what I'd choose." Back at the car, Peter handed me a folder with initial quotes and a phased timeline. "You'll need to talk to your bank," he said. "I can recommend a builder with flexible payment options if you want to split phases, start small and add later." "I won't be borrowing," I said. Peter raised an eyebrow. "I'll pay up front. I want no strings, just independence." He didn't press. "In that case, it's your timeline." On the drive back, I didn't put on the radio. I just listened to the quiet hum of the road and tried to imagine mornings in a home where no one knocked unless they wanted to visit, where the kitchen held only my groceries, where I could open the door and see my breath in winter and not worry if it bothered anyone. I stopped at the bank on the way home. I had made an appointment the day before, requesting a consultation with a senior advisor, not because I didn't know how to manage money, but because I wanted someone who could help me cut the threads. The woman who met me was in her 50s, professional but kind. Her name was Naomi. She wore a green scarf and red-framed glasses, and she called me Miss Carter the entire time unless I asked otherwise. "How can I help?" she asked. I handed her the folder with the project plan. "I want to liquidate one of my investment accounts," I said, "and I want to transfer the funds to a private escrow, not connected to any family members." Naomi didn't blink. "That's easy enough. Are you the sole account holder?" "I am. Always have been." "Any joint access anywhere else?" I hesitated. "Yes. One checking account. My son's name is on it." She paused. "Would you like to remove him?" I looked her straight in the eye. I would. Within 30 minutes, she had walked me through the process. Paperwork, new account numbers, privacy notices. She gave me a notary to contact for the deed transfer and a referral for a mobile attorney who specialized in property transitions. Naomi never asked why I was doing this. But as I gathered my documents to leave, she said, "There's peace in knowing something is yours." I smiled. "That's what I'm hoping for." When I returned to the house, no one noticed I'd been gone most of the day. Megan was in the living room doing yoga. Josh was upstairs on a call. Mason was napping. I walked quietly to the guest room and closed the door behind me. I opened the red folder and added the new bank documents. I tucked the builder's quote behind the deed. The pile was growing. That night, during dinner, Josh mentioned that Megan's cousin was moving to town and might stay with them for a few weeks. "We might need the guest room soon," he said casually. I looked down at my plate, mashed potatoes, and a dry pork chop I'd made myself because no one offered to cook. "Don't worry," I said. Josh blinked. "What?" "I won't be in your way much longer." He tried to backpedal. "That's not what I meant." "It's okay," I said, lifting my fork. "You don't owe me anything. Remember?" Megan went silent. Even she didn't try to spin that one. After dinner, I sat by the window and called Diana. "Phase 1 is greenlit," I said. She let out a breath. I've never been so proud to hear a phrase I don't fully understand. "I'll explain over coffee." "I'm buying," she said, "and I'm bringing a measuring tape. You'll need curtains." I laughed softly. It had been a long time since I laughed that way. A real one. The kind that didn't come with an apology. Before I went to bed, I added one more item to my list. Curtains, soft gray, thermal, quiet folds. I liked the sound of that. Over the next 3 days, I began the quiet process of vanishing. Not dramatically, not all at once. Piece by piece. I started with the closet, folding my sweaters and cardigans into 2 large bags I'd kept hidden beneath the bed. My slacks, my church dresses, my walking shoes. Everything I truly owned. I left behind anything that had been bought for me by Megan. Those Christmas gifts with tags still on, never chosen with care. I sorted my paperwork in the early mornings when the house was silent. My new bank documents, insurance files, copies of my medical records. I tucked everything into the red folder, which now felt like a living thing, growing with every page, gaining shape and direction. On Thursday evening, Megan came into the guest room without knocking. Her eyes swept over the open suitcase on the bed. "Are you going somewhere?" I didn't look up. "I'm preparing." "For what?" "My next chapter." She folded her arms. "You're being vague, and you're being invasive." That silenced her for a moment. "I just think it's a bit rash to make big decisions so soon after surgery. You are still adjusting." "No," I said calmly, folding a pair of wool socks. "I'm recovering. That's different." Megan didn't argue further. But I saw her eyes flick to the folder on the nightstand. She recognized it. Red, organized, threatening. She didn't say goodbye when she left the room. That night, I emailed Diana again. I gave her the date. "Next Friday, the keys will be in my hand. Can you help me move the essentials?" She replied within minutes. "Absolutely. I already cleared the day." I smiled and cried at the same time. Quiet, tears, grief for what had been and what would never be. On Friday, the contractor texted, "Slab is poured, walls go up Wednesday, plumbing by end of week." "You're ahead of schedule." I stared at that message for a long time. Ahead of schedule. Not just the house. Me. I was ahead of the moment I thought would destroy me. I was walking faster than the heartbreak. Saturday morning, Mason climbed onto my lap as I was rolling socks. He pressed his face into my shoulder, his breath warm and sticky with syrup. "Are you moving, Grandma?" I hesitated. "Yes." He blinked up at me. "Can I come?" I kissed the top of his head. "You can visit." He looked sad, so I whispered, "Where I'm going, there are bunnies in the woods." His eyes widened. "Really? Really? Can we name one?" "Of course." He rested his head against me. I memorized that moment. The weight of his body, the smell of pancakes in his hair, the unconditional love of a child, too young to lie. When he left the room, I opened my notepad and wrote, "For Mason, a pair of boots, a soft chair, and a patch of clover near the porch." Sunday was quiet. Josh watched football. Megan worked on her laptop, muttering about deadlines and emails and her friend Becca's baby shower. No one asked me anything. No one offered dinner. I boiled rice and sautéed some zucchini with garlic and ate alone in the guest room. The door cracked open, just a sliver. At night, I lay on my back and stared at the ceiling. I thought of my husband, of how proud he would be. Not that I'd finally stood up for myself, but that I hadn't waited for anyone to grant me permission. Monday morning, I wrote a letter, not a farewell, just a statement. I left it in an envelope, labeled Josh, placed neatly on the dresser. It read, "Dear Josh, this isn't a punishment, this isn't about blame. It's about space. Space to breathe, to rest, to remember who I was before I became someone else's afterthought. You were once the reason I built a life. Now, I must build my own. Love." Mom. I didn't write one for Megan. She would never read it honestly. By Tuesday, I had packed everything but the linens and my tea mug. I called the moving service and confirmed the pickup time Friday. "Are you sure you don't need help lifting?" the woman asked. "I've been lifting things heavier than boxes for years," I replied. "I think I'll be fine." That night, Megan asked if I'd be around for dinner the next day. A strange question, almost polite. "No," I said. "I'll be out." Her expression froze for a split second. Then she smiled too wide. "Okay, just checking." Josh didn't speak to me at all that night. Not out of anger, out of distance. He knew. He just didn't know how to ask the question he was too afraid to hear the answer to. I didn't volunteer it. Not anymore. Friday morning came, like the closing of a long chapter, no fanfare, no confrontation, just the steady hum of inevitability. I woke before dawn, dressed in layers black slacks, a soft gray sweater, and my walking shoes. I pinned my short gray hair back with a clip and looked at myself in the mirror. For the first time in months, I saw someone who looked like she belonged to herself. The movers arrived at 7:45 sharp, two young men in matching uniforms, who introduced themselves as Theo and Carl. They were polite, quick, and surprisingly gentle with my things. I had labeled everything in advance: books, linens, kitchen, personal. My entire life now fit into 12 boxes and 2 duffel bags. "I'll follow you out there," Diana said as she parked behind the truck. She stepped out with coffee in hand, wrapped in a long scarf. "You didn't think I'd let you do the first drive alone, did you?" I smiled, blinking away the sting in my eyes. "I figured you'd bring bagels too." She grinned. "Check the back seat." At 8:15 a.m., I stepped into the house one last time. Josh was in the kitchen in his robe, holding a mug, looking like he hadn't slept. "You're really going through with it," he said, voice flat. "I am." He ran a hand through his hair. "You could have told me more. Talk to me." "I tried," I said softly, "many times." He looked down, said nothing. I didn't hug him. I didn't cry. I just nodded and turned to go. Mason stood at the top of the stairs in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes. "Grandma?" I walked back, leaned on the banister, and smiled up at him. "You be good, okay? I'll write to you soon." "Where are you going?" "To a house with a porch." He looked puzzled. "Like in the books?" "Yes, baby, just like in the books." He waved. I waved back. Megan didn't come out of the bedroom. I didn't wait for her. The car was already half loaded when I closed the door behind me for the last time. The red folder sat on the passenger seat, tucked under a folded sweater. I drove in silence most of the way, Diana following close behind. Every few miles, I'd glance at the rearview mirror and see her little blue car trailing faithfully. We reached the property around noon. The movers were already there, unloading boxes and setting them near the freshly constructed steps. The house looked real, like it had always belonged on that plot of land. White walls, pale wood trim, a deep porch that faced the trees. The contractor had even added the wind chimes I picked from the catalog, 3 brass tubes that sang gently in the breeze. Clint waved. "We finished the plumbing this morning. You've got water, power, and hot showers." "Miraculous," I said. Inside, the place still smelled like paint and pine. The main room was simple, an open kitchen, a cozy living space, one small hallway leading to the bedroom and bath. Nothing fancy, but every inch of it was mine. Diana came in carrying a vase with a few sunflowers she must have picked up that morning. "Housewarming," she said. "Even if it smells like caulk and sawdust." She helped me unpack. We opened the boxes labeled kitchen and put away dishes I'd collected over decades. Plain ceramic plates, mismatched mugs, a teapot with a cracked handle. I lined the drawer with soft gray contact paper and placed my utensils down like sacred objects. In the bedroom, we laid out my quilt. It was the one I'd made the winter after my husband died, stitched from old shirts, pillowcases, and scraps of fabric from Mason's baby clothes. I spread it across the bed slowly, smoothing every wrinkle. By evening, the sun dipped behind the tree line, and the house glowed in warm amber light. Diana and I sat on the porch, drinking mint tea from chipped mugs. She said, "It's quiet. It's peace." I replied. We didn't speak for a long while after that. We didn't need to. At 7:30, I received a text. It was from Josh. "Are you okay?" I stared at it for a minute, then I typed, "Yes. Are you?" No reply came. I turned off my phone. That night, I took my first shower in the new house. The water pressure was perfect, the tiles were clean, the towel warmed in my hands, and I didn't hear footsteps behind the door. Afterward, I stood at the window in my nightgown, looking out at the stars. No streetlights, no traffic, just crickets and the hum of stillness. I whispered, "I did it." No one needed to hear me. Except me. The first full morning in the new house was so quiet I could hear my heartbeat. No thudding footsteps from upstairs, no distant microwave beeping, no muffled conversations that fell silent when I walked into the room. Just the tick of my small wall clock and the rustling of wind in the trees outside the open window. I sat at the little kitchen table, sunlight spilling across the floor like honey. My teacup steamed beside a fresh notepad labeled "This Life." The list I wrote wasn't about chores or groceries. It was softer, more sacred. Make soup from scratch. Find a used bookshelf. Walk at sunrise. Write Mason a letter. Sit in stillness. I underlined the last one. I had spent so many years filling silence with usefulness. If I wasn't cleaning, I was cooking. If I wasn't cooking, I was offering to babysit. I thought doing made me needed. I thought being needed meant being loved. But here in this quiet, it occurred to me that I could exist without proving it. I didn't need to be useful to be worthy. After breakfast, I walked the path behind the house. Clint had cleared the brush just enough to make a trail, and I followed it slowly, my cane steady beneath my hand. Leaves crunched underfoot. Sunlight filtered through the trees in golden shafts, catching dust and insects mid-air like suspended magic. Halfway through, I came across a fallen log. I sat. I don't know how long I stayed there, watching the wind comb through the leaves, long enough that the light shifted, long enough that I stopped worrying about the time. When I came back inside, I made soup from scratch, carrots, potatoes, lentils, a bay leaf for depth. The aroma filled the tiny home with warmth. I poured some into a blue bowl and sat on the porch while it cooled. That's when the mail arrived. A rusty red mailbox stood at the end of the drive. I hadn't checked it yet, assuming nothing would be there so soon. But when I opened it, I found two things. A welcome letter from the county with my new official address. A pale yellow envelope with Josh's handwriting. Back on the porch, I opened it carefully, as if it might fall apart in my hands. "Mom, I don't know how to say this without sounding selfish, but I'm struggling with the fact that you left. Not that you moved out, but how final it all feels. I think I expected you to always be nearby. Maybe that was wrong. Maybe I took you for granted. Mason keeps asking about you. I don't always know what to say. Megan and I, things are tense. I won't lie. I guess I just want to know if there's a version of this where you still visit, where you still feel like part of our family. I miss you. Josh." I folded the letter and sat with it in my lap. I didn't cry, but I let myself feel all of it, his confusion, his attempt at softness, his failure to say I'm sorry. Progress, maybe, but not arrival. That night, I pulled out my own stationery. "Dear Mason, today I walked in the woods and saw a rabbit. Not the cartoon kind, the quiet kind that freezes when it hears footsteps. I think we'll name him Clover. I've made a spot just for you here. When you visit, we'll pick blackberries and paint rocks and maybe even build a birdhouse. Tell Daddy that I'm okay. Tell him I'm listening. But sometimes grown-ups need time to grow too. Love. Grandma." I sealed it and added a pressed red maple leaf I'd collected earlier. In the morning, I would walk it to the mailbox. Not because I owed anyone anything, but because love, when freely given, is not a debt. It started with a car engine. Not the familiar hum of the postal truck or the neighbor's sedan, but a hesitant crawl along the gravel drive. I looked up from my journal and peered out the kitchen window. A silver SUV. Josh's. I didn't move right away, just watched as the door opened and he stepped out alone, holding something bundled in brown paper. He looked older than he had a month ago, tired, less sure of himself. I met him on the porch, but didn't invite him in. Not out of coldness, just clarity. He stood at the bottom of the steps. Hey. Hi. I didn't know if I should come, he said. I texted. But I turned off the alerts, I said gently. It was intentional. He nodded like he understood, though I wasn't sure if he truly did. I brought you something, he said, holding up the bundle. It's one of Dad's old photo albums, thought you might want it. That stopped me. I stepped down and took it from his hands carefully. The leather cover was worn at the edges, the binding loose. I could feel the familiar ridges beneath the material. My fingers trembled, not from weakness, but from memory. Thank you. We stood in silence for a while. He looked around at the porch, the house, the trees. It's nice out here. It is. Peaceful. That's the idea. He shifted on his feet. Mason talks about you all the time. He keeps drawing pictures of Grandma's forest house. He tells everyone you have rabbits. I do, one named Clover. Josh smiled faintly. I don't know how to talk to him about all this. I want him to understand that you're not gone, but also not his daily background anymore. You'll find the words, I said. Children are better at forgiveness than we are. He looked down at his hands. I've been doing a lot of thinking about everything, about what I let happen. I didn't interrupt. He continued. I think I confused comfort with loyalty. Megan was the loudest voice, and I didn't fight to hear yours. A breeze rustled the wind chimes behind me. Their tones were soft and patient. I appreciate that you're reflecting, I said, but reflection isn't apology. He flinched, just slightly. I know. I'm working on that part. He looked at the front door. Can I come in? I took a breath. Not today. He blinked. Oh, I'm not angry, I said, but this space is still sacred to me, and I'm not ready to mix it with the version of you who didn't see me for years. He nodded slowly. That's fair. I softened my voice, but you can sit on the porch. If you'd like some tea. He took a breath of his own. I'd like that. We sat in silence while the kettle boiled. When I brought out the tray, I noticed his eyes tracing the tiny details, my teacups, the homemade napkins, the vase with dried wildflowers. His gaze lingered on the red folder, now resting beside a closed journal. You always did know how to build a world, he said. Yes, I said, and I finally built one where I could hear myself think. He took a sip of the tea and winced, still strong. I haven't dulled with age. He smiled, despite himself. That's clear. I turned to him. This isn't exile, Josh. You're not banished. I feel like I was. That's not because I pushed you away, I said. It's because you never learned how to stand beside me without stepping on me. He looked wounded, but he didn't argue. I'm not asking for a clean slate, he said. Just the chance to keep showing up. That will depend on whether you do, I replied. We finished our tea in quiet. Before he left, I handed him an envelope. Inside was a letter addressed to Mason and a small watercolor postcard I'd painted of a bunny near a pine tree. I still want to be his grandmother, I said, even from a little farther away. Josh's eyes glistened. He'll be thrilled. As he turned to go, he looked back one last time. I'm proud of you, Mom, even if it took me too long to say it. I watched him get into the SUV and drive away down the gravel road. When the sound disappeared completely, I walked back inside. I opened the photo album. There we were, me, Josh, my husband, young and unguarded, a picture of me holding Josh on my hip, his small arms tangled in my hair, one of us at the beach, another in the garden, dirt under our nails. I ran my fingers over each photo. Not grieving, just remembering. Later, I returned to the porch with my notebook and wrote, Day 32 in my new life. My son visited. I served tea. Not forgiveness, but maybe something close. I met her while looking for curtain rods. The aisles of the local hardware store were wide and dimly lit, the shelves stacked with things I hadn't named in years. Wall anchors, socket extenders, rust remover. I'd come for something simple, but I lingered, running my hands over the cool metal like I might absorb its knowledge through touch. She was about my age, maybe a little older, short silver curls, blue work shirt, khakis dusted with sawdust. She was comparing drill bits, a serious squint behind her glasses. When she noticed me scanning the curtain rod kits, she smiled. You'll want the kind with the center bracket if your window's wider than 4 feet. I blinked. I had no idea. She pointed. Those ones tension rods work better for smaller rooms, bathrooms, places where you don't want to drill. I took the package she suggested and nodded. Thank you. No problem, she said. I've redone every window in my house twice. You start learning the hard way, what bends and what breaks. I laughed. That's a useful philosophy. She extended a hand. Joyce. Eleanor. Her grip was firm and warm. New to the area? She asked. Yes. Just moved into a small place off Pine Creek Trail. She lit up. No kidding. I'm the next turn over. You must have bought the new build tucked between the pines. I nodded, surprised. That's the one. You've got a good porch, she said. Perfect for storms. You'll see there's a hush that comes just before the rain hits. Feels like the trees are bracing. We talked a bit more, nothing deep, but friendly. As we headed to the registers, she said, I host a little get-together every second Saturday. Nothing fancy, tea, stories, too many cookies. You should come by. I hesitated. It's just women like us, she added, reading my pause. Nobody trying to sell you candles or convert your soul. I smiled. I'll think about it. When I got home, I installed the curtain rod. It took me longer than it should have, and the bracket was crooked at first, but I adjusted it until it sat just right. I hung the soft gray thermal curtains and stood back, admiring the folds, the way they diffused the light. One small thing, done by me, for me. That evening, I opened my journal and added, hung curtains today, without asking for help. The rod is straight. I am too. The days that followed were slow in the best way. I cooked in small batches, planted a few herbs in the planter by the steps, and spent long hours on the porch with a book in hand and no one asking what was for dinner. My body moved at its own pace, no longer rushing to keep up with someone else's urgency. Mason sent a drawing, a rabbit holding a basket of acorns. His stick figure self stood beside it, labeled Emmy in large capital letters. Beneath it, in Josh's careful writing, he says this is your forest friend. Clover is now officially a superhero. I framed the drawing and hung it near the kitchen sink. Later that week, I accepted Joyce's invitation. I wasn't ready to belong to a group again, but I was ready to belong to a moment. Her house was simple. Like mine. A few other women were already there when I arrived. Linda, with a laugh like a kettle boiling over, and Carol, who brought orange shortbread cookies that crumbled perfectly. They welcomed me not with questions, but with space. I sat between them on the couch and listened as they talked about fences and foxes, politics and grandkids, the absurdity of online dating, and which brand of tea didn't taste like boiled grass. At one point, Joyce leaned over and said, "We don't gossip here. We excavate truth." I liked that. I left with a small tin of loose-leaf tea and the feeling that something had quietly mended inside me. That night, I stood on the porch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, listening for the hush before the rain. It came, just as Joyce promised, and I felt something settle. Something like home. Winter came slower in the pines than it did in town. The trees held their golds and reds like they were reluctant to let go, and the sky turned silver without ever looking cold. I'd walk the edge of the property most mornings, with my scarf tight around my neck, my cane crunching softly in the frost-bitten leaves. Each morning was a ritual: tea, a moment on the porch, and a deep breath before I opened the red folder. It didn't hold just paperwork anymore. I had slipped in notes, Mason's latest drawing, Joyce's cookie recipe scribbled on a napkin, a photo from Diana tucked between legal forms. There was a quote, too, handwritten on a scrap of envelope. I did not come this far only to come this far. That morning, as I sipped my tea, I thought about what I had left behind and what had never been mine to keep. My family hadn't vanished, they had simply realigned. Like stars that shift, still glowing, just not in the same constellation anymore. I had received another letter from Josh earlier in the week. This one came with more than words. Inside the envelope was a key, a spare to his house. Just in case. No pressure, Jay, it was progress. Maybe even peace. But I didn't add the key to my keychain. I placed it gently in a small wooden box, alongside a baby tooth of Mason's that Josh had given me once, and a photo strip from a booth at the state fair when I was still a new mother and thought I had to be perfect to be enough. I knew better now. On the first Sunday of December, I invited Diana and Joyce over for lunch. Nothing fancy, just soup and bread, rosemary steeped into the crust, and a fire crackling low in the wood stove. They brought gifts, Diana with a potted amaryllis, Joyce with a jar of marmalade, and a story about the time she accidentally set her oven mitts on fire. We laughed hard, the kind of laughter that empties out grief like air from a sealed room. Later, after they'd gone, I sat alone by the fire. I realized something. I had thought this journey, this reclaiming of self, would be marked by noise, a confrontation, a declaration, but it wasn't. It was marked by quiet decisions. The day I called the realtor. The moment I folded the red folder shut. The way I stood at the porch when Josh arrived and didn't step back. I hadn't cut them out with a blade. I had simply stopped stitching myself into a pattern that never fit. And in doing so, I'd discovered something astonishing. I hadn't lost everything. I'd found the parts of myself I thought I had to give up to be loved. I'd found the strength to choose solitude over scraps. I'd found my voice, not loud, not bitter, but clear. As night fell, I stepped outside with a mug of warm cider and looked up. The stars here were brighter, they always had been. You just had to be far enough away from noise to see them properly. The wind picked up and carried a sound through the trees, wind chimes, distant and delicate. A sound like goodbye, a sound like beginning. Inside, I wrote one final line in my journal. I was never asking too much. I was just asking the wrong people. And I closed the book. Not the story, just the chapter.